Grace, known as Angel in the pre-dawn hours, had mastered the art of illusion. Yet, it was a profound silence, not a whispered demand, that truly caught her attention one lonely night. A single, desperate tap on the phone line became a beacon, signaling a human connection far deeper than any she'd known, promising to change her life. The clock on Grace's monitor glowed 2:17 a.m. Outside her small, meticulously clean apartment, the city of Portland slept. But here, in the blue light of her screen, her world was wide awake. She was Angel, and her voice, a well-practiced melody of honey and promise, was her only tool. "Of course, baby," she murmured into her headset, her eyes tracing the water stain on her ceiling. "Tell me exactly what you want." The man on the other end, a gruff, impersonal voice she'd heard twice before this week, grunted his demands. Grace delivered her lines with the detached precision of a surgeon, her mind a million miles away. The call ended as it always did, abruptly, with a click and the silence that followed. She let out a slow breath, the performance dissolving from her features, leaving behind the quiet weariness of a 42-year-old woman. She took a sip of her cold chamomile tea. The system chimed again. Another call. She clicked accept, straightened her back, and summoned Angel back to her lips. "Hey there, handsome. You've got Angel." Silence, not the hesitant silence of a first-timer, but a deep, unnerving void. She waited. Company policy gave her 10 seconds. At 9, a sound finally came through. It wasn't a word, but a raw, splintered noise, like a gear grinding against rust. It was a sound of immense, painful effort. Grace's finger hovered over the disconnect button. Any other operator would have dropped the call, marking it as a prank or a technical issue. But Grace paused. She leaned closer to her microphone, her brow furrowed. There was something in that broken sound, a desperate, clawing humanity. She softened her voice, letting the persona of Angel fall away completely. What was left was just Grace. "It's okay," she said, her tone gentle, patient. "Take your time, I'm right here." Another agonizing sound, then a soft thud against the caller's microphone. Frustration. An idea sparked. "Listen," Grace said slowly, clearly. "You don't have to talk. How about this? If you can hear me, just tap the phone. Tap once for yes, twice for no. Can you do that for me?" The silence stretched on. Grace held her breath. Then, faint but unmistakable, she heard a single, hesitant tap through her headset. A tiny signal fire in a vast, silent darkness. A small, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in Grace's chest. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't just a voice. She was an anchor. The small warmth from that call dissipated quickly under the harsh fluorescent lights of the next day. A stark white envelope lay on her doormat, its official-looking window revealing a final, aggressive demand for payment. It was the last of the hospital bills from her mother's long illness, a debt that felt like a tombstone in her name. Grace picked it up, her fingers tracing the sharp edges. The number inside, $3,742.18, seemed to mock her. It was an impossible sum, a mountain she had no tools to climb. She thought of her mother's hand, frail and papery in her own, and the sterile smell of the hospice room. This bill was the final, ugly invoice for that love and loss. The pressure of it settled in her chest, a familiar, suffocating weight. Her job, with its clandestine hours and untaxed cash, was the only thing keeping her from eviction, yet it was a leaky lifeboat in a storm, barely enough for rent and utilities, let alone a debt of this magnitude. Later, at the grocery store, the weight of her reality pressed down even harder. For a brief moment, pushing the wobbly cart down the canned goods aisle, she had allowed herself to feel normal, just another person planning a week of solitary meals. Then she heard it, Grace Miller. She turned to see Sarah, a woman she'd known from a church bake sale committee years ago, before her mother got sick, before her life had veered onto this hidden, nocturnal track. Sarah's eyes widened in recognition, a genuine smile starting to form. But then it faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed her face as she tried to place Grace in the present. Grace knew the look. She'd seen it before. It was the mental calculation, the attempt to reconcile the respectable woman from the past with the tired, worn-out version standing before her. Sarah's gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, then darted back up, the warmth replaced by a polite, guarded distance. "Oh, hi," Sarah said, her voice a different, cooler tone. She clutched her purse tighter, a small, defensive gesture. "It's been a while, how are you doing?" The question was a formality, a social placeholder. Before Grace could even formulate a reply that wasn't a lie, Sarah was already creating space. "Well, it was good to see you. I've got to run, kids have soccer." Grace stood frozen, the cold can of generic brand soup in her hand. The brief encounter was a brutal reminder of the chasm that separated her from the sunlit world. She wasn't just poor, she was socially radioactive. The shame, a dull, constant ache, flared into a sharp, piercing heat that crept up her neck. She felt the eyes of other shoppers on her, imagining their judgment. She abandoned her cart mid-aisle, the soup and a box of crackers a pathetic monument to a life she couldn't afford to live. That night, as she sat down at her desk, the thought of putting on the angel voice felt physically nauseating. The headset felt like a lead weight. What was the point of this charade, this nightly descent into a world of faceless whispers, if it only served to deepen her own isolation and couldn't even save her from ruin? The urge to quit, to smash the monitor and walk away from it all, was a siren's call, promising a clean break even if it meant drowning. Then the system chimed. Line 3. Her silent caller. A part of her wanted to ignore it, to let it ring into the void. But in the sea of transactional ugliness, that one call had been different. It hadn't been a demand. It had been a plea. Her finger, acting on an instinct she didn't fully understand, moved toward the mouse. It hovered, then clicked accept. This time, the silence on the other end was different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, saturated with a palpable distress. Grace could hear his breathing, ragged and quick. Then came the sound she remembered, that agonizing, fractured attempt at a word, but it was more desperate now, choked with effort. It broke apart into a guttural sound of pure frustration, followed by what sounded like a fist hitting a table. And then, a new sound, one that sliced through the anonymity of the call. A quiet, choked sob. It was the sound of a man breaking. Every rule in Grace's training manual screamed at her to disconnect. Emotional entanglement was a liability. But the sound bypassed the employee and struck the human being. The script, the persona, the entire artifice of her job dissolved in an instant. She leaned into the microphone, her voice barely a whisper, stripped of all performance. "It's okay," she said, the words coming from a place of deep, unvarnished empathy. "You don't have to speak. I'm here, I'm listening." She didn't offer platitudes or false cheer. She offered only her presence, a quiet anchor in his storm. She sat in the silence with him, her own troubles momentarily forgotten, replaced by a profound focus on the unseen person on the other end of the line. She listened to the ragged breath slowly, painstakingly, even out. She heard the tension ebb from the silence, replaced by a fragile calm. They stayed like that for several minutes, two strangers connected by a thread of shared, unspoken vulnerability. As the call neared the company's automated time limit, Grace knew she had to end it. "I have to go now," she said softly. "But you did good, you stayed. That's what matters." She was about to disconnect when a small, blinking notification appeared in the corner of her screen. The company had a rudimentary chat feature, rarely used, meant for exchanging pre-approved, non-personal information. A message was coming through. She watched, mesmerized, as letters appeared one by one, slow and deliberate, as if typed by an unpracticed hand. "THANKYOU." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the two simple words. Then more letters began to form, each one a testament to a monumental effort. "YOUNEVERLAUGHEDATME." The sentence hung there in the sterile chat box. But for Grace, it was a flare in the dead of night. It was the most profound thing anyone had said to her in years. He hadn't thanked Angel for a fantasy. He had thanked Grace, not Angel, for a simple act of decency. In a world that judged her, dismissed her, and made her feel invisible, this silent man had seen her. He had seen her respect, her patience, her humanity. That single sentence didn't pay her bills or mend her social standing, but it was a lifeline. It was a flicker of light in the suffocating darkness, a reason to hold on for one more night. Miles away in a quiet suburban house, Sean sat in the glow of his own monitor, his hand trembling slightly from the effort of typing. His sister, Clara, stood in the doorway of his study, a cup of tea in her hand, her expression a familiar mix of concern and helplessness. She was an administrator at a major rehabilitation hospital, a woman used to solving complex problems, but her brother's silence was a fortress she couldn't breach. 6 months ago, Sean had been at the top of his game. He was the host of Sounding Board, a popular podcast celebrated for its deep-dive interviews. His voice, a rich, resonant baritone, was his identity, his livelihood, his art. People said he could make the phone book sound like poetry. Then a cerebral hemorrhage, swift and brutal, had silenced him. The stroke had left him with severe expressive aphasia. The words were all still there, trapped in the brilliant, frustrated mind of a master communicator, but the bridge between thought and speech was a ruin. Clara had watched his world shrink. He'd retreated from friends, from physical therapy, from her. His frustration would curdle into a silent, simmering rage. He'd smash things or simply sit and stare at the wall for hours, a prisoner in his own head. The professional therapists were kind but clinical. They gave him exercises and charts, but they couldn't reach the man drowning inside. That evening, something was different. Peeking into his room, she saw him not staring at a wall but at his computer screen. He was using the assistive typing software his speech therapist had installed, the one he'd stubbornly refused to touch for weeks. Curious, Clara quietly walked closer. She saw the chat log, a conversation with an anonymous entity named Angel. Her protective instincts flared, worried he was being scammed or mocked. She scanned the log, her eyes catching the last few lines. Angel, I have to go now, but you did good, you stayed, that's what matters. Sean K. THANKYOU Sean K. YOUNEVERLAUGHED Clara stopped breathing for a second. That last sentence, it landed with the force of a revelation. In all their efforts, had anyone stopped to consider the profound, crushing humiliation of his condition? The fear of being seen as broken, as an object of pity or, worse, ridicule. This woman, this angel, working in one of society's most stigmatized professions, had offered him something no one else had: unconditional acceptance. She hadn't tried to fix him. She had simply created a safe space for him to exist as he was. She looked at her brother. For the first time in months, the hard knot of anger in his shoulders had loosened. There was a flicker of light in his eyes she hadn't seen since before the stroke. This anonymous voice on the phone, this stranger in the night, had done more for his spirit in a few brief calls than weeks of professional therapy. She hadn't just been an operator, she had been a lifeline. And Clara, a woman who solved problems for a living, knew she had just found a crucial, unorthodox piece of her brother's recovery puzzle. Navigating the labyrinth of the phone company's privacy policies was a challenge, even for a seasoned hospital administrator like Clara. It took 3 days of persistent calls, carefully worded emails, and the leveraging of her professional credentials. Citing a need to conduct a follow-up for a patient's alternative communication therapy, she finally persuaded a skeptical supervisor to forward a message. It wasn't a direct line, but an official, anonymized email request for a meeting. When Grace received the email, her blood ran cold. It was from the company's corporate account, with the subject line, "Formal inquiry regarding client interaction." The formal, sterile language spoke of a third-party request and a proposed meeting at a neutral location. Her mind immediately leaped to the worst conclusions. The silent man had filed a complaint. Or worse, his family had found out and was preparing to sue her or expose her, ruining what little she had left. All her fears about emotional entanglement came crashing down. This was the price for her moment of genuine connection. She walked to the small, independent coffee shop Clara had suggested, the daily grind, with a sense of dread. She clutched her worn handbag like a shield, expecting to face an irate husband or a lawyer. She chose a small table in the corner, her back to the wall. A few minutes later, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a kind, professional demeanor approached her table. "Grace Miller?" she asked. Grace nodded, her throat too dry to speak. "I'm Clara Kent," the woman said, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm and warm. "Thank you for coming. Please let me get you a coffee." The simple gesture of kindness was so disarming that Grace felt a wave of confusion. This wasn't an ambush. As Clara returned with 2 lattes, she didn't lead with accusations. Instead, she began to talk about her brother, Sean. She spoke of the man he was before, vibrant, eloquent, a voice that captivated thousands, and the profound, suffocating silence that had enveloped him after his stroke. "He wouldn't engage with anyone," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "He felt erased. We have the best therapists, the best technology, but we couldn't get past the wall of his shame." She paused, looking directly at Grace. "And then he found you, or Angel, I should say." She slid her tablet across the table. On the screen was the chat log Grace remembered. "He showed me this," Clara said, pointing to the final line. "You never laughed at me." "Grace, do you have any idea what that means? You gave him a space where he didn't have to be a patient or a project. You just let him be human. That was the breakthrough. That was the start of him fighting back." Grace stared, speechless, the warmth from the latte cup seeping into her numb fingers. "I'm the director of patient experience at Northwood Rehabilitation Institute," Clara continued, her tone shifting from personal to professional. "We are constantly looking for better ways to connect with patients who have communication barriers. What you did for Sean, that instinctive empathy, it's a skill, a rare and valuable one." She slid a folder across the table. "This is a proposal. We want to develop a new online pilot program, a workshop for our staff and patients' families. It's about teaching empathetic communication, how to listen to silence, how to use nonverbal cues, how to build trust. We're calling it the listening bridge." She took a deep breath. "And we want you to help us design it, to lead it. This isn't a volunteer position, Grace. It's a formal, paid consulting contract." Grace looked from the folder to Clara's earnest face. The sounds of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of conversations faded into a distant hum. A contract, a job, a title. It was an offer not of charity, but of respect. It was an acknowledgement that the very quality that defined her secret, shameful life was, in fact, her greatest strength. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden, blurring the official-looking papers in front of her. For the first time, they were not tears of shame or despair, but of overwhelming, unbelievable hope. 6 months later, the fluorescent lights were no longer a source of dread, but a spotlight. Grace stood at the front of a bright, modern conference room at the Northwood Rehabilitation Institute. She wore a simple, professional navy blue blazer and a pair of dark slacks, an outfit she'd bought with her first paycheck. The flimsy headset and the persona of Angel were ghosts of a former life. In front of her, a name card read, "Grace Miller, Empathy and Communication Consultant." Her audience was a mix of nurses in their scrubs, earnest-looking speech therapists, and a handful of anxious family members clutching notebooks. This was the second official workshop for the Listening Bridge, a program that had, in its short existence, become a quiet revolution within the hospital. Its success had been immediate and profound. "The most important thing you can offer someone who has lost their voice," Grace said, her own voice calm and clear, resonating with a confidence she never knew she possessed, "is not your words. It's your silence. It's a silence that isn't empty. It's a silence that listens. It's a space where they don't have to perform or apologize or struggle. A space where they can simply be." She didn't teach from a textbook. She taught from her heart, from those nights spent deciphering taps and interpreting ragged breaths. She shared stories, Anonymized, of course, of how a simple, patient presence could diffuse a moment of intense frustration, or how validating a nonverbal cue could be more powerful than 1,000 words of encouragement. The nurses, accustomed to the clinical demands of their jobs, listened intently, recognizing the truth in her words. The family members, weary from the strain of caregiving, looked at her with a dawning sense of relief, as if she were handing them a key they desperately needed. Grace was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. She had her own small office, a place filled with sunlight. The crushing medical debt was gone, paid off in 3 installments. The shame that had shadowed her for years had receded, replaced by a quiet, steady pride. She had discovered that her greatest talent wasn't a manufactured voice for lonely men, but an innate ability to hear the profound, unspoken needs of the human heart. She was finally truly being seen for who she was. After the last participant had left, their parting words of gratitude still warming the air, Grace sat down at the conference table, a contented sigh escaping her lips. She opened her laptop to review her notes for the next session and saw a new email in her inbox. The sender's name made her heart skip a beat, Sean Kent. She clicked it open. The text was composed on an assistive device, but the sentences were fluid, structured with the elegance of a mind that had never lost its command of language. The email was short. Grace, for months I believed my voice was gone because I couldn't make a sound. You taught me that a voice isn't just about making sound. It's about being heard. You were the first person who truly heard me, not through my ears but through my silence. Now, because you listened, I'm starting to find my own voice again. Thank you. Sean. Grace read the message once, then twice. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, reaching her eyes and filling them with a soft light. The city outside was preparing for nightfall, the time her old life used to begin. But her world was no longer shrouded in darkness. She had stepped out of the shadows, not by escaping her past, but by embracing the best part of it. She hadn't just rescued herself. She had helped build a bridge for a soul trapped in silence, a bridge that was now leading him back into the light. And in doing so, she had finally found her own way home.